capability they brought in. So they have been at war with us, whether we acknowledge it or not, for 47 years. The same goes in Afghanistan. Name the Islamist enemy, whether they are Sunni or Shia, because this is a Shia regime, Sunni or Shia, and Iran's been willing to harbor them as long as that group is willing to try to kill Americans. So the enemy of their enemy has been their friend as well in the Islamist world. So Iran, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's around the world, has been targeting Americans. And what they wanted in this context, and what President Trump would not tolerate, is a regime of that nature being closer to nuclear capabilities, a capability they would.
I do want to talk about the lessons learned question because it's important to me. I won't share particular tactical lessons, and the KC-135 incident is under investigation. I want to talk about how I think about this and how we think about it, and this is something that I'm pretty passionate about. I believe that in each case, both at the strategic, operational, and tactical level, we've charged the joint force to look at themselves and say, what was our plan? Well, first, did we have a plan, yes or no? The answer is always yes, because we plan for literally everything. Did we execute our plan, yes or no? If we did it work? If not, why not? If we didn't execute our plan but did something better, what's the lesson learned associated with that? And then how do we quickly capture loss or every engagement and quickly adopt those lessons and then share them across the entirety of the joint force? And inside the joint staff, we've tasked our J7 directorate under the lead of Lieutenant General Lazewski, a United States Marine, to be extremely entrepreneurial in harvesting and capturing those lessons in a proactive and not reactive way. In fact, we've got teammates from the J7 who are now spread out across the CENTCOM theater, both here in the States and forward, to grab that lesson and quickly accelerate it into the practice that we adopt inside the joint force, so that if there's a loss or if there's something that we can learn from, that we learn it not only in the CENTCOM AOR, but we adapt it across all of the combatant commands, not just Indo-PACOM. And it's across all of the warfighting functions. I've asked them to look rigorously, to check our egos at the door, to remember this is about what's right, not who's right, and to be clinical around the way we look at lessons. For that question.
Absolutely. Brown jacket at the back.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Jonathan Dreher with Rocha Politics. As you said, at the end of this war, Iran will be without a missile or drone capability, a navy, or the ability to make nuclear weapons. Since the largest threat and sponsor of terror in the region will be incapacitated, are there plans to move assets and troops out of the Middle East? I guess in a perfect world, a year after the war has ended, what does the military presence in the Middle East look like compared to before the war?
Well, I appreciate the question. I do think when you address a real threat head on, it creates to do, which too often this town does, is just sit in the status quo. Oh, nobody can do about that. They've got too much capability. What if this happens? What if that happens? He instead says, what's in the interest of the American people? It's going to take some courage. It's going to take some capabilities. We're going to have to gather some forces there in order to do it. We're not going to tell people how many or how long or what we're willing to do or what we're not willing to do. But if you do that and do that decisively, then out the other end is a recognition that it opens the aperture of what's possible. I mean, President Schwartz, now you've got a situation where a lot of those countries are coming alongside us, recognizing the threat of Iran. So I think our posture in the future will be based first and foremost on our own national security, power projection, the ability to defend our people and our interests. But no doubt, working alongside our partners, the president will look at what makes the most sense going forward. appreciate that question. Yes, right here.
War crime, is that the policy of the U.S. military
Excuse me,
now?
I didn't.
Thank you, Secretary Hegseth. Two questions for you. The Vice President has often emphasized that the goal of this war is to denuclearize Iran while also avoiding a larger quagmire. I know that you touched on this. I'd like you to expand on how do you do that? How do you denuclearize the country while also avoiding this, forever war? And then there was a report last night that the Pentagon asked the White House for $200 billion for Iran war supplemental. Can you confirm this, and can you explain why a package this large is necessary?
Well, first of all, none of this would have been possible without Midnight Hammer, without that audacious mission with very clear goals that did obliterate their ability to enrich and the capabilities they have in those facilities. So it created the conditions for Iran to step forward and say, okay, you can reach out and touch us like that in our nuclear ambitions. You can see that we're still trying to do this. Let's make a deal. And President Trump put our two best folks on it, Steve and Jared, and they worked diligently, earnestly. I watched it to try to pursue that deal. And ultimately, I think the whole time Iran sort of said, well, we'll talk as we build more missiles and as we build more UAVs and we create this conventional umbrella so that if we chose to, we could try to reconstitute the program. And sort of naively thinking that President Trump wouldn't do something about it. And that's why, as Secretary Rubio has said, and I've said, it's the conventional umbrella that was growing and growing and growing that was meant to protect that nuclear capability. So you had to address both what happened with Midnight Hammer and what happened with that as well. As far as $200 billion, I think that number could move, obviously. It takes money to kill bad guys. So we're going back to Congress and our folks there to ensure that we're properly funded for what's been done, for what we may have to do in the future, ensure that our ammunition everything's refilled, and not just refilled, but above and beyond. I mean, President Trump, as he said, rebuilt the military in his first term, didn't think he'd use it as dynamically in his second, but he had. So thank goodness he did that. And an investment like this is meant to say, hey, we'll replace anything that was spent. And now that we're reviving our defense industrial base and rebuilding the arsenal of freedom and cutting deals like our great deputy secretaries here is doing, long lead times on exquisite munitions, we're going to be refilled faster than anyone imagined. And I think, we're also still dealing with the environment that Joe Biden created, which was depleting those stockholds and not sending them to our own military, but to Ukraine, which is every time we reach back and look at any sort of a challenge we have, it goes back to, well, send it to Ukraine. Ultimately, we think this should be these munitions are better spent in our own interests at this point, and this kind of funding bill is going to ensure that we're moving forward. We'll take one more right here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jordan Conradson with the Gateway Pundit. So with the strike yesterday on South Bar's gas field, if the U.S. didn't know about it or didn't approve of it, it kind of seems like a trend of Israel apparently pursuing their own objectives over U.S. objectives. I'm not sure if you agree with that, but the president has said he doesn't want to hit Iran's oil infrastructure right now. As you said, the U.S. avoided this on Park Island. Oil's nearing $120. Why are we helping Israel prosecute this war if they're going to pursue their own objectives?
We hold the cards. We have objectives. Those objectives are clear. We have allies pursuing objectives as well. And the truth speaks for itself. I mean, President Trump was very clear about that. Iran has weaponized energy for decades. Israel clearly sent a warning, and POTUS has made it clear, very clear. Iran knows when you hit Karg Island and you hit military capabilities on Karg Island, which is the only thing we hit, we can hold anything at issue, anything. The United States military controls the fate of that country. Iran has the ability to make the right choices. It should not, going forward, target Arab allies, Arab countries, trying to create the pain that they created themselves. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Well, good morning. Yesterday at Dover Air Force Base, President Trump, the chairman, and I stood in solemn silence as heroes came home. Flag-draped caskets, we honored them. We grieved with their families, and we listened. What I heard through tears, through hugs, through strength, and through unbreakable resolve was the same from family after family. They said, finish this. honor their sacrifice. Do not waver. Do not stop until the job is done. My response, along with that of the president, was simple. Of course, we will finish this. We will honor their sacrifice. Their sacrifice only steals our commitment. I wear this bracelet. Staff Sergeant Jorge Oliveira, he was one of my sergeants, or one of my specialists in Guantanamo Bay. He deployed later to Afghanistan, where he was killed on 19 October 2011. Killed 10 years after 9/11, 15 years ago. He was one of the 1%, the best of America. Not just a guardsman, but a law enforcement officer back home and a family man. I remember him every day, just like so many other men and women of our generation and previous generations who wear bracelets like this. Just as we will always remember those lost in this conflict. Their names are now etched into our mission and into the soul of a grateful nation. I stand here today speaking to you, the American people, not through filters, not through reporters, not through cable news spin. A dishonest and anti-Trump press will stop at nothing. We know this at this point. To downplay progress, amplify every cost, and call into question every step. Sadly, TDS is in their DNA. They want President Trump to fail. But you, the American people, know better. Yes, there are reporters in front of me, but they are not our audience today. It's you, the good, decent, patriotic American people. You, the hardworking, tax-paying, God-fearing American patriots. The media here, not all of it, but much of it, wants you to think, just 19 days into this conflict, that we're somehow spinning toward an endless abyss or a forever war or a quagmire. Nothing could be further from the truth. Hear it from me, one of hundreds of thousands who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, who watched previous foolish politicians like Bush, Obama, and Biden squander American credibility. This is not those wars. President Trump.
와, 진짜 예쁘다.
완벽해. 카리나보다
중고차인데 주행거리도 짧고.
차가 먼저인 사람들.
이런 사람들이 책임지는 직영 중고차인가. K카.
One. These are not the media's objectives, not Iran's objectives, not new objectives, our objectives. Unchanged, on target, and on plan. Destroy missiles, launchers, and Iran's defense industrial base so they cannot rebuild. Destroy their navy, and Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. Our objectives from day one. To the patriotic members of the press, nobody can deliver perfection in wartime. This building knows that more than anyone. But report the reality. We're winning decisively and on our terms. Iran is a vast country, and just like Hamas and their tunnels, they've poured any aid, any economic development, humanitarian aid into tunnels and rockets. That's what they did with Hamas. Iran has funneled decades of state resources, not to their people, but into missiles and drones and proxies and buried facilities. But we are hunting them down methodically, ruthlessly, and overwhelmingly, like no other military in the world can do. And the results speak for themselves. To date, we've struck over 7,000 targets across Iran and its military infrastructure. That is not incremental. That is overwhelming force applied with precision. And again, today will be the largest strike package yet, just like yesterday was. As I've said from day one, our capabilities continue to build. Iran's continue to degrade. We're hunting and striking death and destruction from above. Iran's air defenses flattened. Iran's defense industrial base, the factories, the production lines that feed their missile and drone programs, being overwhelmingly destroyed. We've hit hundreds of their defense industrial bases directly. Their ability to manufacture new ballistic missiles has probably taken the hardest hit of all. Ballistic missile attacks against our forces, down 90% since the start of the conflict. Same with one-way attack UAVs. Think kamikaze drones, down 90%. Now, the Iranians will still shoot, we know that, but they would shoot a lot more if they could, but they can't. The last job anyone in the world wants right now? Senior leader for the IRGC or Besiege. Temp jobs, all of them. And to borrow a page from Admiral Ernest King in World War II, we've decided to share the ocean with Iran. We've given them the bottom half. We've damaged or sunk over 120 of their Navy ships, with battle damage assessments pending for many more. See, oftentimes we have to wait a few days on battle damage assessment to get the real number. Their surface fleet is no longer a factor. Their submarines, they once had 11, are gone. Their military ports are crippled. Iran has terrorized the United States and our interests for 47 years. Their core industries, not steel or agriculture or tourism, their core industries are state-sponsored terrorism, proxy militias, underground networks, ballistic missiles, and a violent, messianic, Islamist ideology chasing some sort of apocalyptic endgame. A regime like that, refusing to abandon its nuclear ambitions, is not just a regional problem. It's a direct threat to America, to freedom, and to civilization. The world, the Middle East, our ungrateful allies in Europe, even segments of our own press should be saying one thing to President Trump. Thank you. Thank you for the courage to stop this terror state from holding the world hostage with missiles while building or attempting to build a nuclear bomb. Thank you for doing the work of the free world. Yesterday's ceremony reminded us why we fight. Not for nation building or democracy promotion, but to crush direct threats to America, Americans, and our interests. We fight to win, and we are winning on our terms, following our objectives. My 13-year-old son popped into my office last night while I was editing these remarks. He asked about the war and the families I met at Dover. And I looked at him and I said, they died for you, son, so that your generation doesn't have to deal with a nuclear Iran. It's the truth. And they did. So to the families who said, finish this, we will. And I say the same to every American who wants peace through strength. May Almighty God continue to bless our troops in this fight. And again, to the American people, please pray for them. Every day, on bended knee, with your family, in your schools, in your churches, in the name of Jesus Christ. To the troops, keep going, and Godspeed. Over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you all for being here. I also had the honor yesterday, as the Secretary said, of traveling up to Dover with the President to welcome home our 6 fallen. It was an honor and a privilege for me to be there and to say thank you to their families. And I want to mention their names this morning. From the 6th Aerial Refueling Wing out of MacDill Air Force Base, Florida, but stationed as part of an active associate unit at Birmingham, Alabama, Major Alex Klenner, John Alex Klenner, Major Ariana Savino, she was posthumously promoted from captain to major, and Technical Sergeant Ashley Pruitt, the boom operator on that crew. From the 121st Aerial Refueling Ring, Ohio Air National Guard out of Rickenbacker Air National Guard Base in Columbus, Ohio, Captain Seth Koval, Captain Curtis Anks, and now Master Sergeant Tyler Simmons, who was also promoted in the boom operator on that crew. To a person and every family member I spoke with yesterday, they all shared that their family members loved serving, they loved being part of a great team and a crew, and they loved airplanes and aviation. Our nation's tanker crews really are unsung heroes, incredible warriors who put their lives on the line so we can continue to take the fight to an enemy. I've personally witnessed their courage and tenacity many times, from the morning of September 11th, where they answered my call for some help, to the skies over foreign countries where they've come forward out of their safe tanker track to give me gas when I simply could not leave a ground force that was engaged in a firefight. They've answered the call and come forward time and time and time again. I'm filled with incredible pride and gratitude for all that the tanker crews do, our pilots, our boom operators, and the maintainers. And to the families of our 6 fallen, know that we share your grief. Our nation will never forget their sacrifice, and we will never forget their names. Our entire joint force mourns with you today, and will continue to remember their incredible gift of a great example for all of us. Now let me turn to an operations update. U.S. CENTCOM remains on plan to achieve our military objectives and remain unrelenting in our pursuit of Iranian missile capabilities, UAV capabilities, and their Navy, and as the Secretary said, their industrial base. Each day we continue to attack deeper into Iranian territory. As reported by U.S. Central Command yesterday, the U.S. military dropped 5,000-pound penetrator weapons into underground storage facilities, storing coastal defense cruise missiles and other support equipment. These weapons...
코감기도 왔는데 너 뭐냐? 아직도 안 갔니? 목감기랑 같이 왔네. 선 넘는 요즘 감기. 고농축 연질 캡슐로 빠르게. 모드콜 S로 기선 제압. 고농축 연질 캡슐. 모드콜 S.
We continue to hunt and kill afloat assets, including more than 120 vessels and 44 mine layers, and the pressure will continue. We're flying further to the east now and penetrating deeper into Iranian airspace to hunt and kill one-way attack garrisons, destroying Iran's ability to project power outside of its borders. The A-10 Warthog is now in the fight across the southern flank and is hunting and killing fast attack watercraft in the Straits of Hormuz. In addition, AH-64 Apaches have joined the fight on the southern flank, and they continue to work on the southern side, and that includes some of our allies who are using Apaches to handle one-way attack drones. In Iraq, AH-64s have been striking against Iranian-aligned militia groups to make sure that we suppress any threat in Iraq against U.S. forces or U.S. interests. And we remain focused on pursuit of any platform that Iran could field to harm Americans or our partners. Last Friday, Admiral Cooper and the CENTCOM team conducted precision strikes against more than 90 targets on Karg Island, which included all of their military-only infrastructure, which included air defenses, naval base, mine storage, and deployment facilities. And as the Secretary mentioned, we continue to strike against Iran's defense industrial base and will continue to do so. Today, I want to continue my theme of talking about members of our incredible joint force. Today I want to talk about some exceptional airmen who are engaged in the fight daily. United States Air Force, Air Force Reserve, and Air National Guard crews within our bomber force. The B-1s, B-2s, and B-52s, and the airmen on the ground who maintain and load these weapon systems. They are the backbone of America's long-range strike capability, and their contributions to Epic Fury have been decisive. Assigned to STRATCOM under Admiral Rich Carrell and supported by TRANSCOM, the tanker force that we've talked about, under the command of General Randall Reed, every mission is designed to achieve overwhelming outcomes on behalf of the United States and our allies. Last weekend, I had the chance to go out and see some of our deployed bomber forces, the B-1 and B-52 crews, and I had a chance to sit down with some young aviators and maintainers and ask them, how do you feel? Tell me about your typical day. And these are crews comprised of between 2 and 5 airmen, 2 on the B-2s, 5 on the B-52s, and 4 in the B-1s out there. Some of these Americans are in their early or mid-20s, and we give them the gift of this incredible responsibility, hundreds of thousands of pounds of aircraft, and they take off and go do our work as required. Their mission actually begins the day prior when they're given a target or a bunch of targets, and they begin to study those targets, look at what are the effects required, what are the weapons required to get there, how will we program these weapons, what is the weather, what is the tanker flow. It's an incredibly complex problem that we give each and every one of these crews, and they work it over the period of 24 hours prior, get some rest, and then step out the door to go fly. The last thing they do is they check all of their equipment, their oxygen mask, survival gear, load pistols, and get ready to go. They crank the jets about an hour prior to takeoff and then launch into the daylight, doing their pre-flight checks, and as the kids say, lock in and prepare to go to war, sometimes on a long and stressful journey. During the flight, they're surrounded by technology and capabilities, and they'll do multiple aerial refueling efforts across tankers on the way to the AOR, area of responsibility, either coming from the States or coming from a forward deployed basing. And I will tell you, as a fighter pilot, getting gas is a lot easier in an F-16 than it is in a B-1, B-2, or a B-52, where you are handling this airplane. It is a physical thing, unlike a fighter that's a lot easier. And they stay on that boom for sometimes up to 30 minutes, taking hundreds of thousands of pounds of gas. It is a physical, demanding thing to take gas, and they do it multiple times on the way there, and they do it multiple times on the way home. As they enter the operating area, they bring the entirety of America's joint force together to go do the things that we've tasked them to do, to put bombs on time, on target, with the proper effects. And I know they're feeling a range of emotions, but the thing the American people should take away from it is they're filled with a focus that is incredibly impressive. And they have fear, of course, but their bigger fear is, dear God, please don't let me screw this up, the warrior's prayer that we all have in our souls. In the days of epic fury, they were shooting, as we've talked about in this room, a lot of standoff weapons. Now we've switched and rolled, as I mentioned last week, to stand-in weapons. And behind each and every one of them are incredible maintainers and weapons builders who go out there and make sure these aircraft and their weapon systems are ready to go. These airplanes are so big that they're not in hangars. They're out in the cold, out in the snow, out in the rain. The bombs are being built outside for protection and to make sure that it's safe, and they do it 24/7, 365. It's not comfortable work, but when you go spend just a minute with these incredibly young Americans who are so motivated, you cannot come away from that exchange not being hopeful for America's future. It is simply awesome. And we hand these Americans, young Americans, incredible and weighty responsibility, and they deliver every single time. Quietly, with professionalism and humility, doing the things that we ask them to do. In conclusion, we will continue major combat operations. As the Secretary said, we continue to get busier. I know the Secretary and I share that we're incredibly proud of 2.8 million members of our joint force. I am personally, and we are personally grateful for the tenacity and professionalism of the brave men and women who serve inside STRATCOM, CENTCOM, SPACECOM, CYBERCOM, TRANSCOM, and the rest of the joint force. And I'll close where I started. I ask today that we remember those 6 fallen that came home. They represent the best of our nation. For those families that are feeling the pain, know that we are with you and will remain with you. May we always prove worthy of their sacrifice, and I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. take a couple questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given the updated degradation in strike target numbers you laid out, how close would you say we are towards achieving the president's objectives, and what is the end game of the operation without divulging any sensitive battle plans?
Well, we wouldn't want to set a definitive time frame on that, but as we've said, we're on plan. So we're looking at those metrics very closely, relaying that to the president and the national security team, but feel confident that as, again, we're more stand in means we're over the top, even further in, and we have even more of an exact sense of what we're striking and why, and even more dynamically, meaning because the intelligence improves, we're able to more quickly identify targets when they, let's say they come out of an underground facility where they've been hiding and able to strike it before it strikes or right after it shoots. But we're very much on plan, and that's why I want to speak to the American people here. You hear a lot of noise about widening or new missions or speculation about what we should or should not be doing. This is a clear set of objectives. The president has given us every capability we need to accomplish that. We've got the best in the world in uniform executing it on the ground. They believe in and are invested in this mission, and it will be at the president's choosing, ultimately, where we say, hey, we've achieved what we need to on behalf of the American people to ensure our security. So no time set on that, but we're very much on track. Absolutely. Yes, right here.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. David Zier, Real America's Voice News. What countries have been the most cooperative with us, including the Gulf states, as Europe hedges? And I also wanted to ask you, the internet blackouts by the regime, it's been shut down for weeks. Is the U.S. military playing a role in fighting against the regime, blocking VPN networks and satellites and other things? Is there a role for the U.S. military there?
Obviously, on the allies and partners side, Israel from day one has been an incredible and capable partner, willing and able. There's nothing like capabilities and partners that are able to use them. The Gulf states have stepped up incredibly. In fact, Iran's sort of reckless attempt to strike civilian infrastructure and other things has brought countries who maybe would have not been as all in as they are today squarely into our orbit. And we're proud to be defending with them, standing with them, you name it. UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and others who have been right there. And we're grateful for that kind of support. As far as the internet, we're watching the regime try to tighten its grip as much as possible. And we're obviously taking countermeasures, many of which we can't talk about here, to ensure that messaging is delivered, not just to the Iranian people writ large, but to the right audiences, certain audiences that need to hear certain things about what their fate might look like or what their choices are. So even though that regime is trying really hard to ensure the world can't see, right? They want to put out fake AI-generated images, which, by the way, sometimes our press happens to fall for, like the Abraham Lincoln on fire and turning around. These AI-generated images are meant to make it look like something's happening when the exact opposite is. So they make up fake reports and fake images to lie to their own people to try to make it. But even then, their own people can barely receive a lot of those messages and communicate because of the blackout that they've imposed upon them. But we work around that for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. General, overnight, Iran launched missiles across the Gulf. They managed to hit the Saudi oil refinery on the Red Sea. What does it mean that they have that capability now, 3 weeks into the war? And Mr. Secretary, you mentioned civilian infrastructure. Iran seems to be treating U.S. diplomatic outposts, embassies, consulates like they are legitimate hard targets in the region now. What is the Pentagon doing to, I guess, secure those assets, stop those attacks?
Absolutely.
Thanks for the question on the missile strikes. You know, as we said and have always said clearly, they came into this fight with a lot of weapons. This is why we continue to be as aggressive and assertive as we can against their ballistic missile capability, both their medium-range ballistic missile capability and their short-range missile capability. So we are continuing to hunt and find them and kill them, and we will continue to do so. So they still retain some capability. And we have...
압도적 돌파력, 비타민을 만나다. 비타민의 가치는 흡수에 달려 있으니까. 돌파하라. 하루티. 리포점으로 비타민의 흡수력을 높이다. 하루틴 리포존 비타민.
캡틴 하루틴 돌파 완료. 대한민국 비타민 캡틴 하루틴.
And what was the Iranian state? There's a reason we call Iran the #1 state sponsor of terrorism, because they took the money they make and they invest it in tunnels, and they invested in missiles, and they invested in launchers and UAVs, and we are destroying and degrading that in historic proportions. But it doesn't mean they won't still have some and try to hold people at issue, which is why we're fighting every single day to continue to compel. And you mentioned embassies and consulates. Unlike previous administrations, we are doubling and tripling down on ensuring that our people, regardless of their Department of War, Department of State, whatever they do, are secure in those facilities. And the best defense is a good offense. And so we're not afraid to go after and kill anybody, and we have a lot of them attempting to target our diplomatic facilities. Iran, you know, we're not surprised that they would indiscriminately target, and we're still seeing that. Jerry.
As part of the justification for the war against Iran, the White House has laid out in fairly comprehensive fashion that the Iranian regime's 47 years of terrorism aimed at the U.S., including pointing to the IRGC's provision of weapons and EFPs to help kill Americans in Iraq. The Pentagon in 2019 assessed Iran was responsible for the deaths of at least 603 service members in Iraq, but there hasn't been a similar public accounting by Iran's role helping the Taliban in Afghanistan. And that also hasn't been part of the White House's public argument. I was wondering if you could speak to Iran's role in helping the Taliban during the war in Afghanistan. And Chairman, as you and the Secretary eloquently spoke about, 13 U.S. service members have been killed so far during Operation Epic Fury. I was wondering what lessons have been learned from those deaths, both from Iranian strikes, from an aircraft refueling accident. How are those lessons being applied to the current conflict, and how are those lessons going to be applied to a potential conflict in Indo-PACOM?
Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. And it's true. In a town that can have a very short memory, President Trump does not. He remembers what this Iranian regime was founded on, what their declaration has been from the beginning: death to America, death to Israel. They've stated that. They've intended to, in every way, try to accomplish that, killing Americans in any theater they can, embassies for quite a long time. In Iraq, that was the deadliest weapon, was the EFP, the explosively formed penetrator. I was there when that tactic and technique started to emerge, and the realization was it wasn't just jihadis putting together 155 rounds daisy-chained. It was an entire state, a country with its apparatus able to mold steel in a way that was specifically designed to penetrate American armor and kill Americans. This was not, maybe we send them a couple of thoughts about how to build a bomb. This was Iran specifically passing technology and wherewithal and personnel into Iraq to kill Americans specifically. I know the number is said to be 600. A lot of us think it's higher than that, given the amount of capability they brought in. So they have been at war with us, whether we acknowledge it or not, for 47 years. The same goes in Afghanistan. Name the Islamist enemy, whether they are Sunni or Shia, because this is a Shia regime, Sunni or Shia, and Iran's been willing to harbor them as long as that group is willing to try to kill Americans. So the enemy of their enemy has been their friend as well in the Islamist world. So Iran, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's around the world, has been targeting Americans. And what they wanted in this context, and what President Trump would not tolerate, is a regime of that nature being closer and closer to nuclear capabilities, a capability they would have said they would want to use, and we ought believe what our enemies say they would do if they got the most dangerous weapon in the world. So it's been across every theater that Iran's been a threat to America, and sometimes we have to remind folks of that, but thank goodness we have a commander-in-chief who, on behalf of this country, has internalized that and said, hey, we're going to do something about it.
Jerry, I do want to talk about the lessons learned question because it's important to me. I won't share particular tactical lessons, and the KC-135 incident is under investigation. But I do want to talk about how I think about this and how we think about it, and this is something that I'm pretty passionate about. I believe the Joint Force has to be a very fast learning organization, early, often, and always. And so in each case, both at the strategic operational and tactical level, we've charged the joint force to look at themselves and say, what was our plan? Well, first, did we have a plan, yes or no? The answer is always yes, because we plan for literally everything. Did we execute our plan, yes or no? If we did it work? If not, why not? If we didn't execute our plan but did something better, what's the lesson learned associated with that? And then how do we quickly capture those lessons after every loss or every engagement and quickly adopt those lessons and then share them across the entirety of the joint force? And inside the joint staff, we've tasked our J7 directorate under the lead of Lieutenant General Lazewski.
You know, they never want to say what kind of price they think or price they're targeting, but they think if this conflict continues to last to the end of April, you're looking at $180 on Brent, not the physical cargoes, on Brent crude.
S&P 500 futures this morning negative by 0.5. In the next hour, we'll catch up with Jim Bianco of Bianco Research, Michael Zezas of Morgan Stanley, Paul Sankey of Sankey Research, and Terry Wiseman of Macquarie. The second hour, just around the corner.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm David Gura.
I'm Lisa Mateo. And I'm
오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도, 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은
Introducing Bloomberg This Weekend, bringing a little Bloomberg into your weekend routine.
Guys, buckle up.
Tariffs, I think, are probably the first time in my career I've had to deal with like a fundamental change in government policy in terms of how we think about how markets work.
The challenge, especially within my supply chain, is now how do you have enough productivity initiatives to offset the increased cost of all the product?
Can you just move your supply chain out of China and into the US or out of Mexico and up to Canada? Is it that easy?
It's not that easy, but we do have flexibility. And we had been, prior to tariffs, prior to any of this, we had been on a journey to diversify our footprint out of China. So probably 2-ish years ago, roughly 65% of our toy and game volume was coming from China. Today, as we entered into 2025, that was around 50%. All we've done is really accelerate the path to get down to roughly, call it 30% by the time we enter into 2027. For us, I mean, if tariffs stay, if tariffs go, it's never good to have so much of your manufacturing base centered on one geography. We think the diversification is good, but it does take a bit of time to get vendors and suppliers up to speed. Quality is a big deal, especially when you're dealing with toys and kids. It's not an instantaneous thing, but it's not also a 5-year, have to build a new plant from scratch.
Breaking news on this Saturday morning.
There's really only one story, and that is Iran.
Balance of Power has all the angles covered.
Trust Bloomberg for on-the-ground coverage.
An entire region pulled into this conflict.
Talking to you from the bomb shelters.
Up-to-the-minute reporting.
Iran remains a viable threat.
And the analysis you need.
There was no imminent threat.
There's never a good time, but there are better times.
Netanyahu is my opponent. However, on this issue, we stand together.
Nobody covers geopolitics like Bloomberg.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Amin, only on Bloomberg.
You know how the market day started.
Find out how it finishes.
Public markets to private markets.
From the micro to the macro.
Covering retail, entertainment, the business of sports.
The supply chains, trade policy, how it all is impacting the U.S. equity market as we drive to the closing bell at 4 p.m.
A holistic approach to covering financial markets.
If it matters to your life, we're covering it. I'm Katie Greifeld.
And I'm Romaine Bostic, and this is The Close.
Live every weekday.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
We have an economy that faces growth as well as inflation risks.
There are short-term impacts, but there are also longer-term impacts that these central bankers have to consider.
You can't hit the global economy with a shock of that magnitude and not expect bad things to happen.
No doubt, I think you are going to see uncertainty start to weigh on corporate confidence.
The risk of recession is higher than the markets believe.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and Anne-Marie Hordern.
Live from New York City this morning. Good morning for our audience worldwide. The second hour of Bloomberg Surveillance starts right now, and your scores, the price action looks like this. Futures down again with negative 0.5 and heading towards a fourth consecutive week of losses, the longest such streak in more than 12 months on the S&P 500. In the bond market, yields shaping up as follows. Twos at the front end of the curve since this war started, up 50 basis points stateside, up another rate this morning, 386.83. And in the commodity market at the moment, Brent crude, since this war started, up 50%. Physical barrels, up a ton more than that. 109.41 on Brent, WTI 95.43.
The price keeps going when it comes to physical barrels, these barrels that are basically stuck, and now we have a bigger problem. And Halima Croft talked about, we went from bad to worse in terms of the situation in the Middle East because energy infrastructure has been hit. And you're hearing from the heads of these companies like the Qatar Energy CEO, Saad Al-Kaabi, talking about force majeures are going to have to happen. They're not going to be able to fulfill long-term LNG contracts, which is why you see officials at the ECB incredibly concerned about inflation because it's going to hit them pretty immediately. It's looking very dire for some of these economies. And right now, Jonathan, although you do see Benjamin Netanyahu and the president almost looked calculated, coordinated in their effects in trying to tamp down what's going on, saying energy facilities will be no longer targets, that's not happening for the Iranians.
Let's just focus on energy, movement and production. For a long time through this war, 3 weeks of it feels much longer. For a long time through this war, we were focused on the movement of energy, the Strait of Hormuz. Is it temporary? How long does it last? Now we have to think about the long-term production impact. And that was the critical turning point of the conversation yesterday around Qatar and the strike on LNG and LNG capacity. And I think the most important line in the reporting, and it came from Reuters yesterday, was how long it's going to take to repair the damage that was done. And it wasn't 12 months. It wasn't in months. It was 3 to 5 years. That changes the conversation, and then all of a sudden the market started to turn. And there was just that moment yesterday for a few hours where we started to really consider the duration impact, how long this was going to last, and the damage it would do to growth over a longer period of time.
We are talking about years for these facilities to get back up and operational to where they are today. And we're just talking about one example in Qatar. We do know that a refinery in Saudi Arabia was hit yesterday. Overnight this morning on the East Coast, you had Kuwait had a facility hit as well. So they are picking apart pockets, as well as the UAE, picking apart pockets across the Gulf in terms of what the Iranians are willing to hit. And they say they are not going to back down.
And the longer it goes on, the more governments need to think about offsetting some of the pain, particularly over in places like Europe. Do they have the fiscal space to respond? In the UK, a little bit earlier, big headline crossing the Bloomberg. The highest yield we've seen on a 10-year maturity going back to 2008. Forget the Liz Truss stuff. We've had massive moves this month alone. At the front end of the curve by 100 basis points on twos. You're seeing it at the longer end of the curve as well. Why? I think it's a question about fiscal space here, particularly not just for the UK, but for the Europeans. Spain with this headline moments ago. They're going to cut fuel and electricity taxes in an economic relief package. How many more such packages will we see if this continues?
A ton. And I think you can take the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and what Europe did. They learned a lot from that, and they realized they need to move expeditiously when it comes to energy prices. And we already know energy prices in Europe are so much higher. They are importers of it, and also they tax it heavily. You're going to see a lot more economies probably say, we're going to have to give the consumer a bit of a break here.
For once, the action's elsewhere. Crude's actually pretty stable. At the front end of the futures curve, Brent crude 109, WTI at about 95. Coming up this hour, we'll catch up with Jim Bianco of Bianco Research as the US and Israel attempt to de-escalate. Michael Zezas of Morgan Stanley as the White House rules out an export ban. And Terry Wiseman of Macquarie as bond markets feel the shock. We begin this hour with stocks extended declines as crude continues to climb. Jim Bianco of Bianco Research writing the West underestimated drone warfare, failed to secure Hormuz, and is now facing an oil-driven inflation shock. Jim Bianco joins us now for more. Jim, welcome to the program. I keep talking about this. The numbers and prices we quote at the front end of the futures curve. Do you think that's masking the disruption that's taking place elsewhere?
Oh, yeah, I think it is. And I think the biggest thing about that is that the oil market is bifurcated into three different markets. The Middle East crude oil that goes to Asia is now trading at $160 or $170. The oil that basically goes to Europe is trading at around $115. And the oil that goes to the United States is still trading around $95. We've never seen the market break up this much into three distinct markets like it has before. Usually those spreads are a couple of dollars based on the quality and the transportation costs of the crude oil, but it's never been $80 like we've seen now.
The Energy Secretary speaking at the moment, Jim. I'm going to break in with these headlines and just get Anne-Marie's thoughts on things. This is what Energy Secretary Wright's got to say about unsanctioning Iranian crude. It would be absorbed in 30 to 45 days, and additional Iranian oil would help Asian customers. I just want you to think about what we've heard from the Treasury Secretary at the start of this year. The Treasury Secretary was talking about the war in Ukraine and the Europeans buying Russian energy still and financing the war against themselves. What is this move from the US side, unsanctioning Iranian barrels at a time when they're at war with Iran?
Well, sounds exactly like what Brussels was doing with Moscow and when it comes to still importing Russian gas. President Trump in his first term and his second term has been very direct when it comes to the policy proposals they want on the regime. Maximum pressure. Now they're potentially saying, well, there is Iranian oil that is out there on the sea. We're going to unsanction it, potentially. They're just talking now. They're saying that this would be absorbed in 30, 45 days. This means not all of it would just go illegally to China. Other Asia buyers could potentially buy some of this crude. But it's giving the regime money at a time when they are trying to combat this regime and topple it. And if you're selling this crude legally, how much more money is Tehran able to bring in then from these barrels?
Jim Bianco, Bianco Research, still alongside us. Jim, forgive me for that. Just wanted to jump in and break down some of those headlines. It's starting to feel a little bit desperate. I think they understand that these markets are getting tighter. Jim, I keep going through this framework that we've priced in the shock to energy prices, started to do it into interest rates. Where are we in the process of repricing growth?
I think we're in the process of repricing it lower, but we have to consider where should interest rates be? They should basically approximate nominal GDP expectations. That's a fancy way of saying growth plus inflation. And what I think you're seeing out of the interest rate market, is particularly the short end of the yield curve, is we're going to get more inflation than we're going to get a reduction in growth. And nominal GDP is going to go up. And that means that the appropriate response for interest rates is to go higher. And the appropriate response from central banks might be to hike rates. This is the early 80s. What did we do when we had recessions in the early 80s because they were driven by high inflation? We raised interest rates. And this is what we could wind up seeing now. What would be a giant mistake is to be cutting interest rates into this. We have a deficit of oil right now. Jeff Curry was on with you the other day, did a great job of explaining it. We need 10 million barrels of oil to be consumed less. Somebody not has to buy it. If we're going to start cutting taxes and cutting interest rates to subsidize people to continue to buy higher prices, they're just going to keep going up and up until 10 million barrels are not bought anymore. So we're just going to keep driving prices higher. So I don't think that interest rate cuts is going to be appropriate until this war is over and we can assess the damage.
If we're missing 10 to 15 million barrels per day, as you say, prices will need to rise. At what point do they rise and it starts to hit demand production?
I think it's starting right now, especially out of out of Asia, because of the $170 price you're getting there. We're already hearing that some of the countries in Asia are starting to ration oil because they don't have enough. Now, in the United States, we're benefiting from, we are independent in our oil. We produce enough oil so we won't ever have to ration, but we're still going to be subject to the prices of the world market. We're going to pay a lot for it, but you're always going to be able to go to the gas station and it's always going to have gas available for you.
Right, but right now, if you are an American and you go to the gas station, on average, we're looking at $3.91. So we're about to hit $4 a gallon of gasoline. That psychologically, Jim, is going to be difficult for the American consumer. At what point do you think gasoline prices will be rising enough where it starts to hit corporate profits and other parts of the economy?
I think it's there already, and it will start to do that. I think the only question is, how long does it last? And the answer to that is, when does the oil start flowing? Remember that oil and trade is, everybody loves medical metaphors. It's the circulatory system of the global of global GDP. It's got a blockage right now in a very important artery. That blockage has to open. As soon as it opens and the oil starts flowing, then we can assess how long this is going to be. If it's $3.91 a gallon or that range for a couple of weeks, that's not going to be really debilitating. If it stays there for a month or two or three, then it's a bigger problem.
Jim, you said it's a mistake to cut rates. I don't see a sign of interest rate cuts anytime soon. Do you think it would be a mistake to hike interest rates in places like the UK, places like Europe?
It might not be at this point, because if they don't hike rates, again, that would actually act as a subsidy again, because what's happening in technical terms is their neutral rate is going up quite a bit. And if they don't follow the neutral rate up, then they're going to wind up with leaving rates where they are being too easy in terms of where the policy rate turns. So they might have to start following those neutral rates higher. And we're starting to see that in the United States. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were pricing hikes across the board, and now we're starting to price in we're cutting cuts across the board. Now we're starting to price in small hikes, way less than 50%, but we're above zero for the first time in a couple of years in terms of where we think Fed policy is going to go, and that it is now leaning towards hikes more than cuts.
Jim, it's good to see you as always, buddy. Thanks for breaking it down. Jim Bianco there of Bianco Research on the change to rate pricing we've seen, and it's been aggressive. It's been fast. It's happened really, really quickly at the front end of the UK curve and across Europe too. Deutsche Bank, I mentioned this earlier, now expecting 2 hikes from the ECB over the next year. And Joachim Nagel of the Bundesbank, the German central bank president, out this morning, essentially leaning into the idea they can move pretty soon.
Basically, they're saying they can maybe, or he's saying there's capacity maybe to move next month. This means that the ECB, the European Union, they realize that they need to move quicker potentially, because Jim is right. After Asia, the next point that's going to get hit with the energy shock is Europe. And to your point earlier, Spain's already seeing it today. They're trying to get rid of the taxes when it comes to gasoline, because you know why? For consumers, these levels are just way too high.
Futures, stateside, largely insulated, relatively speaking, to what's happening elsewhere. Equity futures right now in the S&P down by just 1/3%. Let's get you an update on stories elsewhere this morning, worldwide, with your Bloomberg brief. Yahara has more. Hey, Yahara.
Hi, John. The Trump administration is considering plans to occupy or blockade Iran's Karg Island. Axios reporting the operation would be used to pressure Iran to reopen the Straits of Hormuz. It would only be launched after the U.S. military further degrades Tehran's military. The Pentagon is considering sending more troops to the region, with 3 Marine units already on their way. Meanwhile, Iran is stepping up its attacks on energy sites on neighboring Gulf states after Israel bombed its primary offshore natural gas field. Iran striking an oil refinery in Kuwait for the second straight day, forcing the plant to shut down some of its units. Brent has surged more than 40% since the war started nearly 4 weeks ago. And Saudi Arabian oil officials projecting oil prices could top $180 a barrel if the Strait of Hormuz remains blocked for another month. The Wall Street Journal reporting a prolonged war would bring huge Saudi profits, but could trigger a recession. That's your Bloomberg brief. John.
Yahara, thank you. Appreciate the update. More from Yahara in about 15 minutes' time. Up next on the program, downplaying crude concerns.
I thought it would be worse. Much worse, actually. I thought there was a chance it could be much worse. It's not bad, and it's going to be over with pretty soon.
Up next, we'll catch up with Michael Zezas of Morgan Stanley, live from New York City this morning. Good morning.
is going to be the consequence for U.S. markets? We are seeing modest gains across European equity markets.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
I'm David Weston. Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. We go on the road for a look at what lies behind the headlines of today and what will likely be the headlines tomorrow.
We need more transparency.
Oil and gas is still important.
They said every citizen should be investing in the market.
Accelerate progress in all fields of science.
Watch Wall Street Week right here on Bloomberg. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
Asia is at the forefront of some of the world's biggest stories.
And we're here, where the action starts in Sydney.
And in Tokyo, get ahead as the global trading day begins.
The Asia Trade, weekdays only on Bloomberg.
Stocks are down this morning by 0.4%, heading into the weekend and heading towards another weekly decline on the S&P 500. On the Nasdaq, we're down by 0.5. In the commodity market, a quick update for you. WTI on the week is actually lower on the session, on the day, and on the week so far. WTI 95.10. Brent crude is not lower on the week. That's at 108.80, coming very close again to touching 120 in yesterday's session.
I know, and you've been right to point out that spread between Brent and WTI. At one point yesterday, I believe it did touch $20. And that just goes to show how much the U.S. is really insulated for what's going on in the region from an energy perspective, because we are an energy exporter.
Some speculation also that there might be an export ban led to the widening of that spread, I think, and there was some obvious pushback on the record yesterday that that's not happening.
Right. You had the biggest oil executives in the world. You're talking about Exxon and Chevron sitting down with the Vice President of the United States, Secretary Wright, Secretary Burgum, and probably telling them this could have adverse effects. It's not exactly the silver bullet idea you want to think of, even though maybe politically it could be a nice statement for the American people.
WTI 95, Brent crude 108 under surveillance this morning, downplaying crude concerns.
I thought it would be worse. Much worse, actually. I thought there was a chance it could be much worse. It's not bad, and it's going to be over with pretty soon. You could end this thing in not bad, and it's going to be over with pretty soon. You could end this thing in 2 seconds if you wanted to, but we are being very judicious.
So here's the latest this morning. The White House looking to ease energy concerns, floating plans to lift sanctions on some Iranian crude and ruling out an export ban. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall has more. Hey, Tyler.
Hey, John, good morning. Well, this White House is looking for viable options as it seems that the risk of lasting damage to energy supply and infrastructure in the Middle East is only increasing at this point, though the Treasury Secretary floating that we could see a lifting or easing in sanctions on Iranian crude would reverse what is years of U.S. policy, though officials have argued that this could bring about 140 million barrels currently at sea up to a market price of about 2 weeks of supply for allies to buy after a similar move was taken against Russian barrels at sea earlier this month. That was part of a range of options that the administration decided to take in a bid to try to lower prices, including, as you know, waiving the Jones Act, invoking the Defense Production Act to spur offshore drilling, though there are concerns about the timing and the impact that project will have, and of course tapping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to the tune of about 172 million barrels over the next 4 months. The Treasury Secretary suggesting we could see another tapping of the SPR, and we know other options floated, including asking Congress for a federal gas tax holiday and potentially waivers to get higher content ethanol gasoline to the market. Though, of course, the number one thing this White House wants to see is a securing of the Strait of Hormuz as President Trump continues his criticism of allies for not meeting his demand of naval escorts in the waterway. John, at this point, as you mentioned, President Trump, and you heard, is really downplaying what has been the recent spike in oil prices. But still, we know it's becoming a political issue as we head into the midterms. Our analysts at Bloomberg Economics say that the data shows a very strong relationship between higher gas prices at the pump and lower presidential approval ratings.
Tyler Kendall with the latest in Washington, D.C. Outside of the White House, Tyler, thank you. You did get the impression that the administration was worried about this spiraling out of control just yesterday. You also got the impression that Bibi Netanyahu got a phone call from the White House, No inside line on that whatsoever, but just the impression that he got a phone call from the White House to get out there and deny that there was any U.S. involvement or cooperation around the strikes on that Iranian gas field and that it won't be happening again.
Absolutely. It almost felt coordinated because the president spoke about it and he's like, sometimes, you know, we know what they're doing, we're behind them, and sometimes they sort of go off on their own. The president was almost saying that they could be a little bit rogue, but the reporting is at Bloomberg and a number of other sources that the U.S. was aware that Israel was going to go strike South Pars, that huge energy land in Iran that they share with Qatar. But Bibi Netanyahu came out and said, nope, not true. So it did feel like he maybe got a phone call from the Oval.
An attempt to try and de-escalate this just a bit. Michael Zezas of Morgan Stanley writing this: there are still credible paths to de-escalation. Markets are adjusting, but not fully priced for persistence. Michael joins us now for more. Michael, good morning.
Hey, good morning.
Help us have a better weekend, sir. And for everyone else around the world, too. Credible paths to de-escalation. What are they?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they really start and stop with how the U.S. wants to define its end goal here, right? And the U.S. pulling back. So credible is not necessarily the same as easy, right?
True.
So there's paths where the U.S. pulls back and declares victory. There's paths where the U.S. is engaged in regional dialogue. But really, when we talk about how investors are supposed to think about this, about whether or not there are ways to get relief to the global supply chains, to the U.S. consumer, they really kind of start and stop with the duration of the conflict. The discussion about U.S. policy options, you talked earlier about the idea of an oil export ban, those are things that are sort of light impact tactics at best. So we really have to focus on duration.
When you look at 2,200 Marines going towards Iran and potentially going on the shores of the Strait of Hormuz or taking Karg Island, is that a path to de-escalation?
That's potentially a path towards getting oil flowing through the region again, though I can't tell you how credible or how likely it is that those things are to work, right? What that signals to me is that the U.S. is not looking to, or is preparing for an event where de-escalation might take a long time and is looking for options to really sort of force the flow of commodities through the market again.
Also, the Pentagon is asking Congress for more money.
Yeah.
That seems like a signal that this is going to last longer than the 2-3 weeks
Yeah,
the Oval Office has basically was trying to communicate
I think
to the
that's
world.
right, and so that's what we think investors really need to be thinking about: a scenario where oil prices are going to be, $90, $100, $110 a barrel for a couple of months, and what that means. And practically speaking, what we think that means is a little bit lower on growth, a little bit higher on inflation, the Fed pushing off rate cuts, and then the question, of course, is if we're priced for all of that, and the answer is not completely.
Can we work through the numbers?
Sure.
So they're requesting what, $200 billion?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's this costing every day at the moment?
That's a great question.
Do we have an idea of what the numbers are? I'm just trying to understand what that $200 billion will look like over what period of time.
I don't know exactly how much of that is for munitions versus labor, but I mean, $200 billion over, is that the cost for refilling what we spent over the last 2 weeks? I don't know. I mean, obviously it's a lot, right? And it is a lot more probably than the American people would have signed up for if this had been talked about beforehand. And so the other angle of this, of course, is what does it mean going into the midterms, which is, it's not particularly good.
That's what I wanted to ask you. Going into the midterm elections, we're talking about the Pentagon asking for more money, increases of deficit, gasoline prices going up. We are just a hair away from being $4 a gallon. It's not $5, but $4 a gallon is psychologically going to impact the American consumer. What are they prepared to do?
So I don't think they have a lot of options here, right? So they're doing what they can. You talked earlier, I think earlier in the last hour, about things like allowing seaborne crude to be sold that was already under an Iranian flag. Obviously, they talked about, but then discussed or sort of put away the idea of a crude ban, sort of crude export ban. They're probably going to lean on the idea that tax refunds are going to help consumers in the short term. But I think really there aren't a lot of policy options that can mitigate what's happening here at the pump and what's going to happen to inflation over the next few months. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that this has to be an economic disaster, right? I think a lot of this is going to be conditional on what the settling price is for crude over the next few months. If we're in this zone of kind of $90 to $110 a barrel, Fed cuts are going to
for WTI.
Right. Fed cuts are going to get pushed out, and growth is going to be somewhat slower. But you probably still get those Fed cuts over time. Our economists would say that the demand degradation is going to mean that you're going to have to respond to that as opposed to the oil price itself. And then you look at what the equity market setup coming into this was, and it's not that it's fully priced for what's going on, but there was already a lot of margin compression. Half of the Russell 3000 was down more than 20% coming in. So there are signs that as long as this doesn't become a sort of out of control $150 barrel situation, that there are things to do on the back end. And then there are obviously larger themes about the capex that has to go into rewiring supply chains around all sorts of conflicts, not just this one, right? It's a multi-year trend. And then you look at industrials, and there's opportunities there as well. So we don't want to just focus just on the sort of, lower growth, higher inflation impact of this, because ultimately that's a moment we can get past. We want to focus on the secular multi-year trend.
Michael, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here to break it down. Right. Michael Zezas there of Morgan Stanley. Speaking to that, Mike Wilson of the team over at Morgan Stanley as well. Still pretty constructive, looking at 6 to 12 months. And if you ask an equity bull right now, what's anchoring the view? What anchors the bull case right now? And it's earnings. And you'd have to believe that this shock leads to a massive hit to earnings to get bearish and bearish quickly, and I don't see many people willing to do that right now, at least stateside.
The price would need to go higher for oil, and it would need to be more prolonged. But the biggest bull in the street knocked on wood earlier this morning.
Futures this morning on the S&P negative by 0.4. Up next, Paul Sankey of Sankey Research as the US and Israel look to calm energy concerns.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm David Gura.
I'm Lisa Mateo.
And I'm Christina Ruffini. We're tracking breaking news today from Wall Street to Washington.
Let's start overseas. The sector is really propelling this deal forward.
Yeah, the hope is this will open up new markets and provide some additional liquidity.
Of course, now they're going to have competitors.
We got a big week coming up in politics.
Earnings season is underway. We're going to get some key reports.
Everything you need to know before the markets open on Monday.
Introducing Bloomberg This Weekend, bringing a little Bloomberg into your weekend routine.
Guys, buckle up.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live 2 times a day, every trading day. Balance of Power at 1 and 5 Eastern, only on Bloomberg.
Bringing you up to the minute news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Shevrian in Seoul, and this is Bloomberg.
The Middle East and Africa regions are home to some of the biggest deals and fastest growth in the world. Vibrant resources and high-yield investment opportunities abound. I'm Jumana Versace. Join me on Bloomberg Horizon's Middle East and Africa for the stories, newsmakers, and insights shaping the decisions of traders across this exciting region.
You had heightened levels of volatility.
There's still room to maneuver.
We do see opportunities.
It allows you to increase significantly your net income.
Every trading day, only on Bloomberg.
Let's take stock of the price action. Equity futures right now in the S&P negative by 0.4, just off session lows. On the Nasdaq, we're down by 0.5, still heading towards a fourth consecutive week of losses on the benchmark stage side, the longest weekly losing streak going back more than 12 months on the S&P 500. The losses over that period, not that great. We're still down only 5% or so from all-time highs on the S&P 500. The losses elsewhere, of course, much greater. In the bond market, shaping up as follows. For 2-year, 10-year, 30-year bond yields, yields higher at the front end of the curve by 7 basis points, 385.76. The move elsewhere, internationally, much bigger. So if you take stock of what we've seen since the war started, 15 days of price action, we've seen a move of almost 50 basis points at the front end of the US curve. At the front end of the UK curve, the 2-year yield is higher by almost 100 basis points. We've priced out easing stateside. We're pricing in interest rate hikes elsewhere in the UK and over in Europe at the ECB. Let's finish on the commodity story. The commodity story right now, Brent and WTI. Brent crude at 107.85. Down on the session now. WTI down on the day and also down on the week. WTI at 94.57, Brent at 107.85. But as we said consistently throughout this program, then financial markets were always pricing and quoting the front end of the futures curve. And what you're really seeing elsewhere is the physical market gets so much tighter and these moves, these numbers, so much greater.
Oman, Dubai, those kind of futures, those kind of barrels, they're moving at 155, 160, 170, depending on the moment of time in the day. And those cargoes are going to Asia, which is why what you see in these Asian economies is rationing, fuel cuts, please carpool. You're seeing, I saw a story from Thailand. Thai Buddhist monks can no longer have the cremation because they have to make sure that they're hoarding diesel and not using it right away. This is hitting these economies in a massive way. And to the rate story, Europe is going to be next.
Europe very much in focus as we count you down to the opening bow, 2 hours away stateside. Let's get you some morning movers. Danny has more. Hey, Danny.
Hey, John. Some earnings out from FedEx, and it is a beat, pushing up to $20 per share for their earnings. Before, the high expectation had been $19. It shows that their turnaround, that their efforts to reshape the company has been working. They also said when it comes to effect of the Middle East, they're not seeing any direct impact. So an ability to weather that. Those shares are up 8% in the pre-market. Elsewhere, the U.S. charging the co-founder of Super Microcomputer with illegally diverting billions of dollars worth of NVIDIA-backed servers to China. That is the co-founder Wally Li Wao. They allege that him, a manager and a contractor, sold chips to a South Asian company knowing that it would end up in China. The lawyers of the co-founder have declined to comment to Bloomberg, and the company itself says that they've placed the co-founder on administrative leave. Elsewhere, Gemini, those shares are up 3.8%. This is the Winklevoss's twins crypto exchange, saying that over the past year, they've let go 30% of their workforce. They said that as they announced losses both for the quarter and for the entirety of the year. It's been a tough go for Bitcoin companies, with the price falling 40% so far from its peak this year. And as a story we've heard a lot before, they say that they're going to be replacing those workers with AI tools, John.
Danny, thanks for the update. Danny Berger there breaking down some of the moves. We'll have more from Danny in the next hour. That Super Micro story's nuts every time I hear about it. On our radar this morning, let's talk about energy. Tehran pressing on with attacks in the Middle East as Israel vows to stop targeting Iranian energy. A drone strike hitting a Kuwaiti oil refinery today and forcing the shutdown of several units. Elsewhere, Gulf nations working to protect just how much crude prices could rise if disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz continue through April. Saudi oil officials telling the Wall Street Journal prices could spike beyond $180 a barrel. And finally, the president, Donald Trump, continuing his pressure campaign on Fed Chair Jay Powell.
He should be lowering rates immediately, but he won't do that because he's a stubborn, incompetent person, and that's a bad thing. You know, when you're stubborn and incompetent, I think it's the worst combination, and he's also not a smart person.
The president signaling his support for the DOJ investigation into Powell, which could delay the confirmation of Fed Chair nominee Kevin Warsh. There was an off-ramp. They're not taking it.
So this is what I keep going back to. The president basically had two doors and options when the U.S. District Court came out and basically said, we're scrapping this, the subpoenas aren't viable. You could have had an off-ramp. This was a gift, potentially. Quickly wrap this up. Senator Tillis gets on board. You can have Kevin Warsh as your next Fed chair. Your nominee is no longer just hanging out there in purgatory. He's going over to the Fed. They're doubling down. They are doubling down, Jeannie Pirro is going for this. She's saying we're going to appeal this. And this means this is going to be a lot longer, which is why, and I'm not saying I'm a conspiracy theorist, but which is why potentially you have to think, if this is the option the president took when he had this gift in front of him, does he potentially want Jay Powell there a little bit longer because they think the economy is going to be weaker and they want a fall guy?
That's one conspiracy. The great irony right now is they'd get those interest rate cuts if we didn't have the war in the Middle East. We've priced out the easing in America. We've priced in rate hikes in Europe, in the UK, precisely because of the move in energy. Crude heading for another weekly gain. Brent crude looking at another weekly gain for Brent this morning. Brent up on the session briefly, up on the week big time, up on the month by something like 50%. And the US and Israel struggling to de-escalate the situation. Paul Sankey of Sankey Research writing, you broke it, you bought it. This is the terrifying near-term question. Either Iran controls the Strait or the USA controls it. Paul joins us now for more. Paul, good morning.
Morning.
How much is broken in the Middle East right now?
Well, now it's almost turning into a humanitarian crisis on the ships. You know, there's now 3,500 ships that are stranded with, running out of water and everything else. So the scale of the disaster here, unfortunately, basically continues to deteriorate. Although, as you mentioned, there's a mild improvement insofar as Netanyahu was saying no more energy infrastructure attacks. But you just quoted me saying, you broke it, you bought it. You know, having attacked South Pars, they've really opened a horrendous Pandora's box. And we understand that the Haifa refinery, which is 200,000 barrel a day, biggest refinery in Israel, was hit and was on fire yesterday. So this continues, and let's just hope that we don't get into global terrorism here against energy infrastructure as well, which would be more of an 180 type scenario if this actually spreads outside the region, which it more or less had already, because we had the situation where the Ukrainians blew up Russian LNG, or carrying Russian LNG tanker in the Mediterranean going into this catastrophe. So the situation is bad. We've highlighted today as a very big day. Ramadan ends, Iranian New Year starts, and we have quadruple witching. So I think we'll be in a pretty wild day here as certainly as the crude contract rolls. It should be pretty crazy, I would think.
Gulf nations have sat this out. Let's just talk about the calendar. They have focused on a defensive posture. Do you see that changing at all?
I do, yeah, because I think they'll form a GCC NATO, and they'll become a bloc of their own. And then I think what they'll try and do is engage the Iranians. I think part of that deal would have to have some sort of withdrawal of the US forces within their own country. So it's an enormous question, that one, for them to deal with.
Hold on. Withdrawal of U.S. forces. Yesterday, had Marco Rubio usurping Congress and sending more hardware to a number of Gulf countries. They're not a monolith.
Yeah, I think one of the kind of nightmares for them has been that when it all kicked off, which was completely to their surprise, especially that, that they were directly attacked by Iran during Ramadan, basically the feeling was that the Americans prioritized Israel and protecting Israel. And so the extent to which, the US is aligned completely with Netanyahu's Israel is a major problem, obviously, for the GCC members and the Iranians. So the question is then they would be forced to turn to China, which I'm sure they don't love the idea of that, but that's the alternate. And when you think about what's happening here, as you mentioned, it's all about Asian supply. It's a global market, but the majority of what they're doing here is sending stuff to Asia. So it could be, a massive realignment here as the US does what was stated and focuses back on the Western Hemisphere. And then these guys kind of go with more of an Asian alignment and Asian defense and make an agreement with Iran, which then it ends effectively with Iran controlling the Straits of Hormuz, which is obviously not ideal.
When you say these guys, and you're talking about the GCC,
yeah.
I want to just stay on this point for a second, because I know the Omani foreign minister, his Economist piece sort of went viral because he was saying America has lost its way. Okay, put them in one camp. But the Saudis and Emiratis are squarely backing Washington in this moment, no?
Well, the understanding was, and we don't know how true this is, that Mohammed bin Salman, the leader of Saudi Arabia, had been encouraging, if you broke it, you bought it, encouraging continued bombing of Iran until, the regime was really in disarray. But we had an intelligence call with Tel Aviv yesterday, and he was saying that when you add it all up, Iran has 2 million military or, military-associated troops in a country of 93 million. And so one outcome could be a civil war within Iran, but it's going to be very, very difficult, basically, to just bomb Iran into regime change. And, you're beginning to say, I think the regime change here might come in November when you have midterms in the US and elections in Israel, with Netanyahu's popularity at about a 40% level, not great within Israel, we might end up with regime change of exactly the opposite that was intended.
These sound like massive changes. What are you advocating for with clients right now in markets, in commodities, in energy stocks?
Well, obviously, the US comes out of this came in as the world's biggest oil and gas supplier and now has become absolutely crucial to everyone, which is one of the things was please don't start putting in export bans. Please don't mess with the market more than you already have. And so we seem to have dodged that bullet through the US oil executives meeting Trump, through, Chris Wright being a real energy guy. And so that's, encouraging. My concern is demand destruction, economic destruction. You're in a situation here where Dubai apparently is losing $1 million a minute. You've seen gold falling, which could well be governments selling gold, to give you an idea of the, the scale of the economic catastrophe.
You think we've got to that point where we're starting to monetize gold holdings because
you've got to wonder why in this tape. You've got to wonder why in this tape gold would be going down, because obviously, in a high-risk tape, you'd expect the opposite. And the one theory would be that you have governments selling gold in order to shore up their, collapsing finances, because, as you know, the scale of the daily sales here is absolutely enormous, and it's gone to zero. And these countries have pretty big outgoings.
Paul, you said more than they have already had in terms of impacting financial markets. Are you talking about a tweet, then delete the tweet to try to impact prices? Are you talking about what they say they have not done, which is the Treasury Department actually getting into the futures market?
That one was super strange because there was I had oil trader out of New York, oil trader chatter saying, there was somebody selling through JP Morgan in that first week when oil absolutely collapsed 2 days after this started. And those numbers were actually doing the round with quite significant numbers attached. It was said to be 50 to 100 million barrels of sales on paper. One thing to keep in mind here, by the way, is that WTI now includes Brent. And so those two markers, you have a mix of stuff within the actual paper market, which again is expiring today. The extent to which we now need a new set of markers, or new markers are developing in the Middle East to try and capture what in many ways is a suspended market, right? You actually don't have a market in the Middle East at the moment for a lot of exports. And so that's why prices are very misleading at the moment and are just simply very likely to be volatile. The general idea is to stay long oil at this point, hope that there's some sort of, the big taco will be, we're not bombing, we declare victory, and see how the Iranians react to that. But it's not obvious that the Iranians will then say, okay, we'll stop too. And even if you do, you've then effectively empowered the Iranians, because what you've said is, okay, we give up. So it's an extremely tough situation. We've been liking US refining through thick and thin, actually, prior to this anyway. I think, it's very impressive the way US gas is performing. I find it cold in New York. And we're seeing that, you have that enormous implied arbitrage between the biggest single loser here, which is European gas prices going absolutely through the roof, Putin more or less laughing in their face. It's a crazy irony that the big winner ends up being US energy.
Just a final question, and a bit of a home bias, so just let us go with this. The North Sea oil, this has become a big talking point in the UK. Where are we now? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I find the UK Energy Secretary talks absolute garbage. He says that the UK is subject to international prices and can't do anything about it, having basically shut down the North Sea. The North Sea, as you know, is far more heavily exploited than the Norwegian North Sea. The Norwegians did the most exemplary job of managing their oil industry that we've ever seen. But in the UK, the fact that they've more or less shut down the North Sea, when the UK represents less than 1% of global emissions, is just a nonsensical energy policy. And I think one of the huge outcomes of this entire thing will be you've got to have strong domestic energy supply, and it's going to be nuclear. It's going to be very bullish coal. And ultimately, it's going to encourage places like the UK to turn around and start re-exploiting their North Sea. You desperately need economic development in the north of the UK and primary economic development.
Just to be clear on the asset, though, you don't think we're geologically constrained. You think we're ideologically constrained?
More ideologically and governmentally, insofar as you've changed the tax rate so many times in what is a relatively very high-risk province that, it's just uninvestable. And you've got to put in some... Now, if you remember the windfall tax of 22 just starts getting extended and extended. I've called it economic harakiri. And then what they've got to do is say, okay, look, we guarantee through some method that you will not change North Sea taxes for the next 20 years. And then companies can come back in and start to re-exploit what would be a potentially very good source of natural gas for the UK, which would be highly complementary to all the wind that they've built. So it's just poor energy policy at this point.
Paul, it's good to see you. Thanks for breaking it down. Blunt, honest, brutal. Paul Sankey there of Sankey Research. And because you don't have that energy security right now, it's going to cost you more. And I think some of that is showing up in the bond market. It's not just a rate story. It's not just about central banks. It's about fiscal space as well.
They don't have the fiscal space. And I think you have to remember the context of all of this. This is what? The third energy shock for Europe. There was COVID. It went in a different direction. But there was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They are still dealing with that. They are still importing Russian energy because they have no choice. And now you're seeing force majeure potentially on LNG contracts from Qatar to Europe. They are in dire straits for this winter.
It's not a good place to be in, that's for sure. Let's get you an update on stories elsewhere this morning with your Bloomberg brief. Yahara has more. Hey, Yahara.
Hi, John. President Donald Trump joking yesterday about Pearl Harbor during his meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister at the White House. Trump saying this after being asked why the U.S. did not inform allies in advance of the strike on Iran.
Who knows better about surprise than Japan? Okay, why didn't you tell me about Pearl Harbor?
The president saying Japan is, quote, really stepping up to the plate. We've had tremendous support and relationship with Japan on everything. The Federal Reserve unveiling proposals to relax capital requirements for Wall Street's biggest banks. The changes could potentially unleash billions of dollars for lending, share buybacks, and dividends. The plans are subject to a 90-day public consultation, but if approved, would represent a major win for the industry. And OpenAI is developing a desktop application to bring together its ChatGPT chatbot, coding tool, and web browser. The company trying to keep users engaged in the face of rising competition from rivals like Anthropic. It's unclear when the application will launch. That's your Bloomberg brief. John?
Yahara, thank you. More from Yahara in the next hour in about 30 minutes' time. Up next on the programme, bracing for inflation.
A prolonged war in the Middle East could lead to a larger and longer-lasting upward shift in energy prices.
But it is too soon to know the scope and duration.
None of us can predict what it will be.
Up next, Terry Wiseman of Macquarie, live from New York City. You're watching Bloomberg TV.
This is the 15, 16 grams tuna. Then sushi rice is still a little bit warm. So take one, like a very, don't make it too tight. So from now, and very light, like a ball. Put wasabi in the middle. Then my process 1 to 6. 1, this is putting the between the rice air. Then make the 4 fingers curl, make sushi shape. Then touch this. 2, then turn. Now these 2 fingers, top to the bottom, make the sushi shape more beautiful. 3, then, looks like pushing, not pushing. 3, 4, turn, same way, 5, and 6. So this is the 1 to 6.
Welcome Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
Why is it that NFTs have not recovered in the same way that, say, Bitcoin has?
Bloomberg is covering all things crypto.
It's a pretty spectacular story.
The people.
This is the future. This is the 21st century economy.
The transactions.
It snapped up nearly $1 billion of Bitcoin.
And the technology.
We need to build a digital Fort Knox.
That gives people financial freedom, and that's a wonderful thing.
That's extraordinary.
We ride the wave that is Bitcoin.
Bloomberg Crypto, only on Bloomberg.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm David Guerrero.
I'm Lisa Mateo. And I'm Christina Raffini. We're tracking breaking news today from Wall Street to Washington.
Introducing Bloomberg This Weekend, bringing a little Bloomberg into your weekend routine. Watch, listen, stream.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute global news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Jumana Bersecci in Davos, Switzerland, and this is Bloomberg.
Stocks are negative by 0.5% on the S&P 500. On the Nasdaq, we're down by 0.6. Energy still elevated, but down on the session now. Brent at 107, WTI at 94. Under surveillance this morning, bracing for inflation.
A prolonged war in the Middle East could lead to a larger and longer-lasting upward shift in energy prices.
Higher energy prices will push up overall inflation, but it is too soon to know the scope and duration of the potential effects on the economy.
By the next time we meet, a lot will have happened, and I can't predict what. I can't possibly, none of us can predict what it will be, but it is a very volatile situation.
It's certainly very volatile. Here's the latest this morning. The conflict in the Middle East pushing global bond yields higher as central banks weigh increasing inflationary risk. Terry Wiseman of Macquarie writing the ultimate cost of the war is unknown, but bond traders aren't taking any chances. Terry joins us now for more. Terry, good morning.
Good morning, Sean.
Terry walked in. I said, what's going on? What kind of a question's that?
In a day like today.
It's going to see what a ride it's been in the old bond market. What's your reaction to the moves we've seen, particularly at the front end of the curve?
Well, the front end of the curve is responding to policy, of course, John. It's you know, what we wrote on March 4th, actually, just a few days after the war began, was that central banks were going to respond to this war and to the implications it's having for oil prices in a hawkish fashion. Now, that might not have been obvious on March 4th, right? You know, in terms of crisis and certainly in terms of high oil prices, we've also seen historically higher unemployment. We've seen recessions in some cases. But I felt that these central banks would have been felt burned by what had happened in 2022 and 2023, and that they weren't going to take any chances. So it's not just the bond traders are not taking any chances here. The central banks aren't taking any chances as well, certainly not through their rhetoric. And that's why the front end of the curves have moved up, and that's why you've seen these very wide swings in the last few days in the money market's projection of where central bank policy rates are going to be at the end of this year.
Credit to you as well, Terry, because the consensus view coming into these central bank meetings is they would look through this shock. Chairman Powell effectively said it's not that simple, and the takeaway from the ECB and the BOE is they might actually hike in the next several months.
Sure, and keep in mind there's something going on here besides just the increase in oil prices and its transmission to CPI, for example. Because if it was just that, it might not be that big a deal, because in many of these industrialized countries, you know, the energy products are not that large a component of the CPI basket. I think what central banks are worried about are the so-called second
대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금 자금 이동 구간 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이 합리적입니다. 마지막 한 문장입니다. 시장은 예측이 아니라 대응입니다. 지금은 방향보다 흐름을 읽어야 할 구간입니다. 오늘 시장은 상승했지만 외국인 대규모 매도 대형주 약세 테마 중심 상승 순환매 구조 이 네 가지가 동시에 나타났습니다. 따라서 지금은 상승장 초입이 아니라 자금 이동 구간으로 보는 것이